Welcome to True Echo, where real power meets raw truth. Drop your city in the comments and let us know where you're watching from, because this one's going to travel far. Malik Jordan didn't come from money. He came from struggle. And his roots, no matter how deeply buried beneath boardroom deals and billion-dollar valuations, always pointed back to the same woman, his grandmother, Alma. The woman who raised him when his mother couldn't, who cleaned houses while humming old church hymns, who made ends meet on knees bruised from scrubbing floors that others walked across without noticing her. But they were about to notice her now. Malik stood 6'2", sharp in a navy suit, his presence magnetic and his name synonymous with disruption. Jordan Technologies, his company, was now the envy of Silicon Valley, a black-owned, independently scaled tech empire. And yet today wasn't about business. Today was personal. He stepped out of the black SUV and walked around to open the door for Alma. She wore a soft cream dress, modest but elegant, with white gloves and a Sunday hat that had been carefully preserved since Easter of '09. She wasn't used to being fussed over, but Malik insisted. "You sure about this, baby?" she asked him, her voice gentle. Malik gave a small smile. "Gran, today's not just about them. It's about you." They were attending a brunch at the Whitmore estate, the same estate where Alma once worked as a maid for over 40 years. The Whitmores, a legacy white family of billionaires, were on the brink of finalizing a $990 million merger with Malik's firm. But for Malik, the idea of this meeting wasn't just a celebration of a business move, it was symbolic. A full-circle moment. The boy whose grandmother was once invisible here now owned the pen that would finalize their future. As they entered the grand ballroom, the air changed. Conversations dropped. Crystal glasses stilled. Alma clutched her purse tighter. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, with pearls resting heavy on her pale neck, narrowed her eyes and offered a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Oh dear," she said, blinking, "I didn't realize you brought staff." Malik froze. The weight of that single sentence settled in his chest like ice. Alma flinched. And then came the dagger. One of the Whitmore sons, Chase, chuckled and muttered, "Didn't she used to clean the toilets?" Alma's eyes didn't well with tears. She'd spent decades learning how not to cry in front of people like this. She simply gave a small nod, as if to say, "Yes, I did, and I still stood tall afterward." She stepped toward the table, hands steady, but a tall butler in a slick black suit stepped in front of her. "The staff table is outside," he said softly, not meeting her eyes. Malik's eyes burned, not with fury, but with clarity. He took her by the arm. Mrs. Whitmore, never losing that cruel composure, added, "We just prefer to keep the guest area refined." The words were blades. The room stayed quiet. Complicit. No one objected. No one dared. Alma nodded again, dignity still intact. "It's all right, baby. I'll sit outside." She was led to a plastic chair in the back garden. No tablecloth. No shade. No offer of water. While inside, the rich raised champagne flutes and toasted the future. Malik watched from the window. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He had seen enough. Malik returned inside, the air-conditioned ballroom now buzzing again with polite chatter and glass clinks. The final contract sat on a polished oak table, ready for signatures. News outlets waited outside for statements. Photographers circled. Board members prepped their speeches. The Whitmores were grinning, their smug victory imminent. But Malik wasn't smiling. He walked straight to the contract, took the pen, and looked up at the room. "My grandmother," he began, voice steady, "cleaned this house. She raised your children. She made your dinners. She scrubbed your toilets. And today, you treated her like dirt." Gasps rang. Eleanor's smile twitched. "Mr. Jordan, perhaps there's been a snap." He broke the pen in half. "Deal's off," Malik said. The room froze. Respect, he continued, voice rising like a storm behind calm eyes, is non-negotiable. He turned on his heel, walking away from nearly $1 billion without blinking. Behind him, board members panicked. Legal teams whispered furiously. Reporters started running for their cars. Malik walked back outside. Alma was still sitting there, looking at the roses she used to water when no one else was watching. "We're leaving," he said gently. She looked up, confused. "But, the deal?" He smiled. "That wasn't a deal. That was a test." And they walked out, heads high, legacy intact. By the time Malik and Alma returned home that evening, the headlines had already ignited like wildfire. Black tech CEO walks away from $990 million deal over racist brunch incident. The woman who scrubbed their toilets just cost them everything. CEO's mic drop moment goes viral, respect over riches. But none of that mattered to Malik. The truth was, he wasn't thinking about trending hashtags or media buzz. He was thinking about the quiet pain in Alma's eyes as she sat outside like a forgotten relic. He thought of how many times she'd probably been treated that way, and how many times she said nothing, for him. He poured her a warm cup of chamomile tea and sat across from her in the modest living room where he had learned his ABCs on the same brown carpet she had shampooed weekly. "I hope I didn't embarrass you," he said gently. Alma looked up from her tea, brows lifted. "Embarrass me? Baby, you gave me something I never got." A voice. She placed her hand on his. "I never thought I'd live to see the day someone stood up in that house, and it was my baby boy." Outside their window, a quiet evening settled over the city. But inside Malik's mind, there was a storm. Because while others saw a heroic walkout, he saw unfinished business. The Whitmores didn't just offend a woman, they exposed a system. And Malik wasn't about to let that slide. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom of Whitmore Holdings, chaos reigned. Eleanor Whitmore was pacing. Her oldest son, Greg, had a tablet open with damage control headlines. "Mom, he tanked the deal on camera. That video's already been reshared over 8 million times in 4 hours. We're bleeding reputation," he snapped. "I don't care about Twitter," she hissed. "I care about securing that deal. Call him back. Apologize. Offer him equity, double it, if you must." But it was too late. Malik wasn't picking up. And worse? Other investors had started pulling out. Activist shareholders launched statements demanding accountability. The press wanted answers. And Malik? He was just getting started. That same night, Malik posted a single message to his 2.4 million Twitter followers. "My grandmother deserved better. So do millions like her. We are not your servants. We are not your second-class citizens. And we will not stay silent." 12 words. That was all it took. It lit a fire across social media. People dug into the Whitmore family's long, checkered history of hiring help from underprivileged communities, mostly black and brown women. Alma wasn't the first. And the receipts started piling up. Malik didn't fan the flames. He didn't have to. The truth had found legs of its own. The next day, Malik received a call, not from Eleanor Whitmore, but from someone he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. "Hello. Malik. It's Henry Whitmore. The patriarch. Old. Ill. And mostly withdrawn from public life." His voice crackled with age and something that sounded like shame. "I heard what happened. I can't undo what my family said, but I'd like to speak. Alone. Just you and me." Malik didn't respond at first. "Please. No cameras. No press. Just, man to man." Malik agreed. Not because he expected anything meaningful. But because he needed to look the man in the eye and understand how the same hands that once gave his grandmother her wages could now be tied to such public disgrace. The Whitmore estate felt different this time. Colder. Quieter. And empty of the self-important bustle from the day before. Henry sat by the fireplace in a room filled with old war medals and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. A crystal decanter of whiskey rested on the table. His hands trembled slightly. "You know," he said slowly, "your grandmother was the best damn person who ever worked in this house. Never stole. Never raised her voice. Always early. Always proud." "She didn't work here," Malik replied. "She served." "There's a difference." Henry nodded, painfully. "That's the part one didn't see. Not until now." Malik folded his arms, jaw set. Henry's eyes, now watery, looked straight into his. "I made my fortune in steel and sweat. I thought I knew value. But the truth is, I built empires on the backs of people like your grandmother. And I never said thank you." A pause. "I can't fix what Eleanor said. Or what my idiot grandson laughed at. But if there's a way forward." "There's not," Malik cut in. Henry's shoulders dropped. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to tell you something. The world you built. The one that told my grandmother to stay outside while people toasted the future she helped raise. That world is dying. And I intend to bury it." He stood, straightened his coat, and left. That night, Malik launched a surprise announcement. Introducing, the Alma Initiative, a $100 million fund to support, educate, and elevate women of color who have served in domestic labor for decades with no retirement, no safety net, and no recognition. It's time to rewrite the script. It was no longer just about Alma. It was about all the Almas. Across the country, retired domestic workers started receiving letters, offering scholarships for their grandkids, housing stipends, healthcare coverage, and more. Some cried. Others danced. Malik watched the responses roll in quietly. He didn't want fame. He wanted change. The Alma Initiative went viral in under 24 hours. News anchors praised it. Advocacy groups rallied behind it. Celebrities shared stories of their own grandmothers, maids, cooks, nannies, who had built empires in silence. But more than anything, the fund struck a chord with a forgotten generation. In a small home in Baltimore, a woman named Gloria, now 78, opened a letter that made her knees buckle. It offered to cover her overdue mortgage and provide healthcare support she hadn't had since the 90s. She wept. Not for the money, but for the first time in her life, someone saw her. Truly saw her. Alma watched these stories unfold on Malik's tablet as she sat in her favorite rocking chair. "They're calling me the face of a movement," she said, half laughing. "Imagine that. Just an old woman with dishpan hands and a crooked back." "You're not just the face," Malik replied. "You're the fire." She paused, then looked out the window. "Your mama would have been proud of you, baby." Malik smiled, but there was something unresolved in his expression. Alma saw it immediately. "What is it?" He hesitated. "There's more I need to know about your time at the Whitmore estate. Things I never asked when I was younger, because I wasn't ready to hear them." Alma's eyes dimmed. She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to poison your heart," she whispered. "You won't," he said. "But silence already has." Back at Whitmore Holdings, the building that once gleamed with arrogance now buzzed with something else entirely, rebellion. Younger employees, many of whom were Black, Asian, Latino, started wearing "Respect is non-negotiable" pins. Human Resources was flooded with complaints about systemic bias. The board of directors demanded a full internal audit. Even a few prominent clients quietly pulled their investments, not willing to be associated with a family being called the face of elite racism across the internet. Eleanor Whitmore, still clinging to her pride, summoned her PR team. "We need to make this disappear," she said coldly. But the head of PR, a young Indian woman named Priya, finally stood up. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't disappearing. This is evolving. You should be the one issuing a public apology." Eleanor blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? You humiliated someone on the basis of where she came from, and it wasn't the first time. The world is watching now. And frankly, so are we." That afternoon, Priya resigned. By evening, 3 more employees followed. Whitmore Holdings, once a symbol of elite preservation, was crumbling not from external attack, but internal awakening. The next morning, a black car pulled into Alma's driveway. Malik wasn't expecting visitors, but the moment the driver stepped out and opened the rear door, Alma gasped softly. An older white woman, dressed in a powder blue blouse and sensible shoes, stepped out, visibly nervous, a manila envelope in her hands. "Who is that?" Malik asked, rising from the couch. But Alma already knew. "Her name's Clara," she said, almost in a whisper. "Henry's daughter. Eleanor's younger sister." Clara approached carefully, eyes on Alma the whole time. I know I have no right," she began. "But may I speak to you, Miss Alma?" Malik moved protectively, but Alma nodded. "Come in, child." Inside, the 3 of them sat in a tense silence before Clara finally spoke. "When I was 6, she said, voice trembling, "I had nightmares every night. My parents were always traveling, and my nanny didn't care. But you used to sit at the foot of my bed and hum old gospel songs. You held my hand until I fell asleep." Alma smiled faintly. "You always asked me to sing, 'Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.'" Clara nodded, holding back tears. "I didn't forget. And I haven't forgotten what happened yesterday. It was inexcusable." She opened the envelope and slid it across the table. "I found this in my father's study after your visit. It's something he wrote about you, decades ago. But he never shared it. I think it's time you had it." Malik opened the envelope and carefully removed a yellowed sheet of lined paper. At the top, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Why Alma Jordan is the heart of this home." It was an essay, part confession, part praise. Henry had written about Alma's strength, her sacrifices, how she taught his children values when he couldn't be bothered. And one passage stood out. "If there's a soul in this house worth remembering when I'm gone, it will be hers, not mine." Alma stared at it, silent. "Why didn't he ever say this to me?" she asked. Clara's eyes filled. "Because people like him only saw value in people like you when they thought no one else was looking." Malik felt the weight of it all, the love, the grief, the systemic rot his grandmother had endured silently for decades. But that silence had cracked. Now, it was time for something louder. That evening, Malik took to the stage at a fundraiser gala hosted by the National Black Leadership Forum. Cameras flashed. Influencers watched. The world tuned in. Malik stepped up to the mic, Alma seated proudly in the front row. "I came here tonight not to raise money, but to raise memory," he began. He held up Henry's letter. "This is what my grandmother meant to them when no one was watching. But now, everyone is watching. And we have a choice. We can either keep applauding performative apologies, or we can invest in real justice." He turned, then pointed toward Alma. "She's the blueprint. The reason I'm here. And she'll never be invisible again." The audience rose in applause. But Malik wasn't finished. "Starting next week, we'll be opening 5 Alma centers across the country, offering legal aid, elder care support, and career training for domestic workers and their families. Because this movement isn't just mine. It's ours." The crowd erupted. Alma wept. Not out of sadness. But because, after a lifetime of being the one who cleaned up after others, she was finally being honored for building something no one could wipe away. The morning after the gala, the Jordan household was quiet, serene, almost. Alma sat at the kitchen table, a soft breeze fluttering the lace curtain as she folded yesterday's paper, her photo now gracing the front page. The housekeeper who humbled the 1% read the headline. Malik poured coffee, his mind already on the dozens of projects ignited by the Alma initiative. New proposals. Real estate options. Hiring social workers and attorneys. But before he could reach for his phone, a soft knock echoed at the front door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Standing on the porch was a sharply dressed courier holding a small, leather-bound envelope sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp. For Mr. Malik Jordan. Hand delivery only. The envelope bore no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note on thick paper. The handwriting, tight and deliberate, read. There are things about your grandmother's time in our house you still don't know. I've kept secrets, but I can't anymore. If you want the truth, come to 1220 Magnolia Road before sunset. Come alone. No signature. No name. Malik looked up, pulse rising. 1220 Magnolia Road. The address was familiar, because it was the guest house behind the Whitmore estate. The one where Alma had lived for nearly 15 years while in service to the family. The house Malik had only ever visited as a child, always kept at arm's length. He didn't hesitate. By late afternoon, Malik drove through the winding oak-covered roads leading to Magnolia. When he arrived, the guest house looked abandoned, paint peeling, shutters askew. But someone had cleared the path to the door, as if expecting him. He knocked once. The door creaked open. Inside sat a woman in her 60s, thin frame, gray-streaked blonde hair pulled into a low bun. She turned, startled but calm. You came, she said. Malik stepped in cautiously. Who are you? I'm Marianne, she replied. I was the cook. And Alma's roommate for over a decade. He blinked. I don't remember you. You wouldn't. They kept the help hidden. Even from each other's families. She motioned toward a box on the table. I kept these, she said. Letters your grandmother never sent. Journal entries. Notes. I was there when something happened. Something that changed everything. Malik opened the box, his hands trembling slightly. Inside were dozens of faded letters, most of them addressed to my Malik, in Alma's unmistakable cursive. But one envelope stood out, sealed, thick, heavier than the others. He opened it slowly. Inside was a document, a handwritten confession. And at the top were the words, for Malik, when you're ready. His eyes scanned the page. What he read made his jaw lock and his throat tighten. They took something from me, years ago. I didn't speak because I was afraid. But you have a right to know. Your mother, Yolanda, wasn't just fired. She was pushed out. After refusing Mr. Whitmore's advances. She left this house in shame. And I stayed, so you'd never go without. Malik read it twice, unable to breathe. His mother hadn't left for drugs, as he'd always believed. She hadn't vanished for the reasons the family whispered behind closed doors. She was forced out. Because she resisted. And Alma had protected that secret all these years. He drove straight home, the sun setting behind him, a red glow painting the sky. When he entered the house, Alma was sipping tea in her chair. I went to Magnolia, he said quietly. Alma didn't react. You knew I'd go, didn't you? I hoped, she whispered. But I never wanted to burden you with that pain. He sat beside her, his voice tight. They tried to ruin her. And you carried that alone. Alma's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I stayed to protect you. They said they'd give you a future if I stayed quiet. And I was tired of watching dreams die in this skin. I needed yours to live. Malik swallowed hard. You gave me everything. And they still tried to erase you. Not anymore, Alma said. Now the world knows your name. And mine. That night, Malik didn't sleep. He walked through his office, past the giant glass windows overlooking the city, the skyline he helped reshape with code, vision, and strategy. But suddenly, all of it felt hollow. He didn't want to build wealth for people who still thought his grandmother belonged outside. He didn't want investors who stayed silent when lines were crossed. He wanted something real. Rooted. And by sunrise, he made his decision. He called his executive board into an emergency session. I'm stepping down, he said. Stunned silence. I'm not leaving the company. But I'm restructuring everything. Jordan Technologies will now become a public trust, run by a collective board, with 51% ownership permanently allocated to underserved communities and minority women in tech. His top CFO nearly dropped his pen. Sir, we'd be the first billion-dollar firm to do that. Exactly, Malik replied. Let's stop asking for a seat at their table, and build our own. By noon, the announcement hit every major media outlet. CEO restructures billion-dollar tech company into public trust for women of color. Malik Jordan just changed the face of tech forever. Critics called him reckless. Visionaries called him a pioneer. But Alma? She just called him her boy. As she watched him at the press conference, flanked by young engineers, domestic workers, and civil rights leaders, her heart felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Because Malik hadn't just stood up for her dignity. He made sure it would never be silenced again. As the news spread across the world that Malik Jordan was turning his billion-dollar company into a public trust prioritizing women of color, reactions poured in like a tidal wave. Some hailed him as a revolutionary. Others labeled him a radical. But the most powerful responses came from those whose lives were already changing. Former housekeepers, nannies, janitors, and cafeteria workers began sharing their stories online under the hashtag #WeAreAlma. From Harlem to Houston, from Oakland to Omaha, the faces of forgotten labor were suddenly center stage. The movement was no longer just Malik's. It belonged to them now. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the Whitmore estate, the mood had curdled into something bitter and unhinged. Eleanor slammed the TV remote down on the marble coffee table, shattering it. He's hijacked the narrative, she hissed. He turned himself into a saint. Greg Whitmore, her oldest son, was pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. Our European partners are getting cold feet. If this keeps up, we could lose everything. Then make it stop, Eleanor snapped. I don't care what you have to do. Later that night, an anonymous source leaked internal emails from Jordan Technologies, suggesting Malik's restructuring plan would alienate traditional investors and place ideology above fiduciary duty. It was weak. Clearly desperate. But in the echo chamber of the financial world, it was enough to spook some old money circles. Stock values dipped slightly. Blogs questioned his mental stability. A few talking heads on cable news accused him of identity politics gone mad. Still, Malik didn't flinch. He was expecting resistance. What he wasn't expecting was betrayal. The next day, he met with his legal counsel and longtime friend, Theo Rankin. Theo was one of the first people Malik had brought into the company, a Harvard law grad who'd helped him navigate his early seed funding battles and courtroom skirmishes with patent trolls. Their bond was more than business. It was brotherhood. But now Theo sat across the table, his expression guarded. I need to tell you something, Theo said, sliding a file across the polished wood. I've been approached by the Whitmores. Malik's heart dropped. What? They offered me a private equity seat on their board, if I convinced you to reverse the trust plan. Malik stared at him. And what did you say? I said no, Theo said immediately. I wanted you to hear it from me before they found another angle. But they're desperate, Malik. They're coming for this movement with everything they've got. Malik exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised the Whitmores would stoop this low. But hearing it spoken out loud, made it real. They're going to spin this, Theo continued. Say you're unstable, that you're tanking a perfectly good company for personal vengeance. We need to respond. No, Malik said firmly. We don't fight with noise. He paused, then added, we fight with truth. That truth came a few days later, at a live town hall hosted in Atlanta, broadcast across major news networks and streamed on every major platform. The organizers had asked Malik to give the keynote. But he declined. Instead, he handed the microphone to Alma. Wearing a deep indigo suit and pearl earrings, she walked slowly onto the stage, supported by a cane but standing taller than ever before. The crowd fell into respectful silence. Alma looked out over the sea of faces, young, old, black, white, all watching her like she mattered. I'm not used to being listened to, she began, her voice low but clear. For most of my life, I cleaned behind others. I raised children who learned to look through me. I ate in kitchens while the parties were in the garden. She paused. But I never hated anyone for it. I just prayed that one day, one of us would get out. Her eyes shifted to Malik, sitting in the front row, tears just behind his lashes. And my baby did, she said, her voice cracking. He got out. And he came back for me. A hush rippled through the audience. I didn't speak up when I should have. I was afraid. Afraid of losing the little I had. But silence didn't save me. And it sure didn't protect my daughter. Alma reached into her purse and held up Henry Whitmore's letter. He wrote this decades ago but never gave it to me. And I carried the weight of those unsaid words like bricks on my back. But now, I lay them down. She gently placed the letter on the podium. Because we can't heal from what we won't name. The crowd erupted in applause, tears streaming down many faces. The feed spread like wildfire across the internet. CNN, housekeeper turned icon, Alma Jordan speaks for millions. Twitter, that woman just undid 400 years of silence with one speech. Hashtag Alma speaks. But not everyone cheered. Back at the Whitmore estate, Eleanor threw her wine glass across the room when she saw the broadcast. Who gave that woman the right to tell our story? No, Greg said quietly, watching the speech play again on his phone. She just told hers. Eleanor shot him a sharp glare. But Greg wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his own children playing on the lawn. And for the first time, he wondered what they would inherit, not just in money, but in values. That night, Malik and Alma sat together under the stars, a blanket over their knees, the soft hum of cicadas in the background. I should be tired, Alma whispered, but I feel like I'm just now waking up. Malik nodded. Everything you went through, everything you carried, I'm going to make sure it wasn't for nothing. She took his hand. It wasn't, she said. Because I see it now. In you. In all of them. And for the first time since walking away from $990 million, Malik felt the one thing that had always eluded him in the boardroom. Freedom. The final battle didn't begin in a courtroom or a boardroom. It started on the streets. A week after Alma's speech lit up the nation, a peaceful protest was organized outside the towering glass headquarters of Whitmore Holdings in downtown Chicago. Thousands gathered, students, retired domestic workers, single mothers, civil rights leaders. They came holding signs that read, "We are Alma. Dignity is wealth. Your maid raised you, respect her." At the heart of the crowd stood Malik, not as a CEO, but as a grandson. Beside him, Alma held his arm, wearing a dark purple shawl and an expression that mixed grace with steel. Helicopters hovered. Media vans lined the street. The world was watching. Again. Inside the building, Eleanor Whitmore peered down from the top floor, her lips curled in contempt. "It's all theater," she muttered. But not everyone agreed anymore. Even members of her own board had begun whispering about resignation, retirement, and distancing from the scandal that simply refused to die. Some began questioning why so many people, black, white, young, old, were willing to march in the name of one domestic worker. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. Just before noon, a luxury town car pulled up quietly behind the protest barricades. Out stepped Greg Whitmore. Not flanked by lawyers. Not in a suit. But in jeans and a windbreaker. He crossed the line and walked directly to Malik, surprising everyone, including his own security. "I came to speak," he said. "If you'll let me." The cameras swung to capture the moment. Malik raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a press conference." "I know," Greg replied. "It's a reckoning." He turned to the crowd and lifted a megaphone someone handed him. "My name is Greg Whitmore," he began. "And I'm ashamed." The crowd stirred, hushed. "I grew up in a house built on the backs of people like Alma Jordan. She cleaned our floors, raised our babies, and we treated her like wallpaper. My family did. And I stood by and let them." He looked down, the weight of decades pressing on his chest. "We called it tradition. We called it class. But it was racism, dressed in pearls." He paused. "I'm stepping down from my role in Whitmore Holdings, effective immediately. I will transfer my voting shares to the Alma initiative, and I'll push for reparative investments in every city where our company profited off black labor." Gasps. Applause. Some shouted in disbelief. Greg handed the microphone to Malik and simply said, "Do what we never had the courage to do." That night, the internet melted down. Whitmore Air joins Alma initiative, transfers shares in stunning reversal. From oppressor to ally. Greg Whitmore breaks from family legacy. Not everyone trusted his motives. But no one could deny that the movement had grown beyond symbolic gestures. The next few months moved like lightning. Whitmore Holdings agreed to fund community centers, pay restitution to a select group of past domestic workers, and, under public pressure, began diversifying its leadership board for the first time in 60 years. But Malik wasn't finished. He took his final step by unveiling a monument in Washington, D.C., a towering bronze sculpture of a woman standing tall, broom in one hand, child in the other. At the base of the statue, engraved in stone, read, "To the women who labored in silence. You weren't just the help. You were the foundation." The monument stood across from a national museum, ensuring that every school tour, every curious tourist, would read their names, etched in honor, not forgotten in shadow. 1 year later. Malik walked Alma through the National Mall. She had aged slightly, but her spirit had never been stronger. Around them, children pointed at the statue. A young girl whispered, "Grandma, she looks like you." "She looks like all of us," Alma replied. They sat on a bench nearby, watching as a class of high schoolers gathered around a guide explaining the history of the domestic labor movement. Malik turned to her. "Still think you're just a woman with dishpan hands?" Alma smiled, her eyes misty. "No," she whispered. "Now I know I was history, just waiting to be told." Malik Jordan didn't just walk away from a $990 million deal. He walked toward something greater. Legacy. Justice. And the redemption of a woman the world forgot, until she reminded us all what true power looks like. Because success means nothing if you forget the people who carried you there. And as Malik showed the world, sometimes, one broken pen can rewrite history. Dignity cannot be bought. Respect cannot be negotiated. And silence, once broken, can shake empires. As Alma proved, the quietest hands often build the loudest legacies. If this story moved you, help it move others. Like, comment your city, and subscribe for more powerful stories from True Echo. Your voice echoes further than you know.